Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate collapse, environmental destruction, weather mayhem, weather whiplash, weather weirding, etc., etc., etc. We have suddenly snapped into a heat wave here in Los Angeles. We had like kind of actually coolish temperatures for a while, and then just out of the blue now, all of a sudden it's 90 degrees. It's been 90 degrees for the last couple of days. Forecast in the mainly mid-high 80s for the next week. That means every single day has a possibility of getting up into 90. If you live here and you know how the sun is heating up quite quickly, if the sun is out, it's getting hot real quick. So I'd say on any given day, it can get high 80s into the 90s, and we're not even hitting summer yet. So quickly, I wanted to read a comment by Miss Gwen Lee, who is a frequent commenter on this channel. She follows this channel. Enjoy her commentary. She had this to say about my last video. I have read many comments today and agree about how people are reacting to the dire news climate change is bringing daily in different ways. I appreciated Guy's presentations a few years ago, but the quality and tone has changed a lot. Smoking pot doesn't cause this. Long-term exposure to chronic stress changes the person and how they handle life. I have observed the symptoms of a person overexposed to high levels of stress hormones. I believe any use of marijuana is therapeutic and highly recommended to treat CPTSD. Yes, I believe that the way Guy was treated by his employer and then so many other colleagues who were afraid to join his truth left him injured. Living with the truth daily has taken its toll. If you look at the body language of other speakers who study this topic, you will often see symptoms of long-term stress. Sometimes I convince myself I'm handling this fine. This lasts until some random stress arrives and I get migraines and other stress problems. Unless you are emotion-free, you will be damaged dealing with this information on a daily basis. None of us has a real clue where we need to be or what is our best plan of action. I believe this will result in more chaos. So have a great day, light up a joint, put on some music, and try to relax. There really isn't much else we can do. I wish you all much love in your lives. Don't be afraid. Now isn't the time to stay inside. Go out and comfort all other humans. They are suffering. Indeed, absolutely. I wholeheartedly concur with this statement and with this message. We are, there's a lot of people dealing with this, I think, on an internal level, and they're struggling with it. There's a few commenters on this channel that I think are struggling with this news. And obviously, I think it's somewhat behind a lot of people's denial or entrance into denial about, is this news real? Is it human caused? It's a lot easier to handle if it's some outside force, rather than, we're doing this to ourselves, and perhaps we could have possibly mitigated a lot of the damage that we're about to cause. And this is going to escalate, I believe. People's stress levels and their cognitive dissonance is going to increase. I believe that people are going to be more distraught, enter states of despair, enter states of anger, lashing out. We have to really be ready to see this and accept it for what it is, and identify with our own feelings around this. I really don't think it's helpful to start lashing out at people, or start calling people names, or start being, you know, vitriolic towards those that don't agree with you, or maybe those that are acting out. We, you know, we really have to try and ramp up our compassion for others. If there's nothing else that we can do, if there's, you know, or little else we can do, compassion is one way we can get through this. And I also believe that compassion is a way that we can communicate these ideas and communicate the reality of what's happening to others in a way that possibly could, you know, change their thinking around this, or, you know, open their minds to this idea, rather than shutting down and shutting it out. I'm constantly fighting, you know, myself with the urge to, you know, to lash out at people who lash out at me, or lash out at the people who are acting out around this subject, or just acting out in general in life. It seems that, you know, obviously I was stating the other day, it seems like people are really angry in general everywhere you go. And as I go out into the world, you know, it's hard for me, you know, I have to really like manage my anger levels and my stress levels so that I'm not reacting to all this extra emotion that's out there. But it's difficult in these days and times because, you know, because so much is happening in the world, so much scary things are happening in the world. You know, social media, outrage is the currency of the day. You know, sure, there are plenty of people who are seeking positivity and trying to recycle some positive messages on social media. I'm not saying that's not happening, but I also do see a fair amount of outrage. But that's just something that we're working through as human beings. That's something that we're working through, I think, as a species, and we'll continue to work through it as long as we are able to, as long as we have the ability to. But I just, in general, think it's a good path. You know, rejecting people or mindset or information is not going to do anybody any good. And it's one of the large problems I think facing people right now is that they are growing more and more intolerant of ideas that don't line up with theirs. And, you know, maybe their ideas aren't based in facts, you know, maybe their ideas aren't based in reality. You know, and it seems to be the rule of the day is just like, get those people out of your life and just block them and, you know, tell them to, you know, screw themselves and, you know, good day, sir, away with you. You know, that's one way to deal with it. It's a very elementary way to deal with it. You know, there's another way to deal with it and that is trying to understand the motives and the emotions, you know, and possibly the factors that, you know, feeding that that viewpoint or feeding that that reality that people are stuck in. You know, I was talking about, you know, maybe other ideas about what's going on, you know, political ideas, a la the Q posts, a la conspiracy theories, a la, you know, other non-mainstream viewpoints of the world and what's happening. I wanted to actually point out something that's really very important that I think that a lot of people are missing. A lot of people that are clued into the mainstream news narrative and people that are, you know, and we'll call that, in general, we'll call that the liberal, left-leaning, you know, AKA progressive viewpoint. The thing that people are really missing, and I think one of the big reasons why Trump was elected is that people were so unable to grasp the reality of other people's viewpoints unable to grasp the reality that so many people felt differently than they did. That it really, I feel like people kind of walked into a wall. Obviously, right after the election, people were just so like dumbfounded and flabbergasted and, oh my God, how could this happen? Before the election in 2016, I saw 2 snap polls. I saw quite a few of these, but I saw 2 that actually registered with me on a very like basic level, that people were not getting the truth, and people were not realizing the truth, and it made having any kind of actual political, actual idea, actual correct information or ideas about what was going on politically, it made it difficult for people to have any kind of real knowledge about this. So I saw a snap poll between Bernie and Hillary before the Democratic convention, and it was like CNN or somebody, and they put up this poll, and it was like 82% Bernie and like literally, whatever it was, 7% Hillary. And they took that poll down, real quick. I mean, I don't even think that poll was up for 8 hours. But I saw the numbers and I saw what that was, and I was like, that's the real numbers. Those are the real numbers. The poll numbers they're showing on the, all the standard polling numbers that they were showing in news broadcasts were bullshit. Were actually manipulated, farcical, fake news, bullshit, right? And when they did the snap poll, just asking people, how they felt, the overwhelming reality of that, like, not only was pretty amazing to see, but also the fact that they snatched that down and couldn't let anybody see this was very, very telling about the narrative that they were trying to shape, mainstream media was trying to shape. So fast forward to after the convention, and it was Trump-Hillary, I saw another poll, same thing. CNN or somebody MSNBC put this poll up. It was like 80% Trump and like 9% Hillary or whatever it was. I don't know. It was, overwhelming for Trump. And I was like, this is what it is. This is how people feel about this election. This is the actual poll. These are the actual numbers. This is not, so again, you had the polling, pretty much Hillary polling a little bit ahead of Trump the entire time. I had, endless debates with people online about, what the actual, about the reality of, backing Hillary as a candidate for president. And all I got was, that's sexist, it's sexism, it's not, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure part of it was sexism, but also, the main part of it was her politics, and the fact that you can't, you couldn't talk realistically about her politics without being called a name, a label, And this is a very dangerous state of human evolution, where you cannot, where if you actually say the truth about something, that if it somehow offends somebody, that you could be labeled, a very bad person, for saying the truth. And this has been true throughout history, obviously. But the thing is that we've, it's become extremely like weaponized. It's become extremely like, informationally, like it makes it difficult for people to actually talk about things and ingest, information, without the outrage, kicking in, without the, the whole, like, you can't say that, how dare you think that, or how dare, like, I mean, it was so crazy. Like, I voted for Jill Stein. I voted for a woman who believed in peace and, demilitarization and, helping the environment. And And I made it very clear, on my social media that I was voting for Jill Stein. And the absolute intellectual tribalism that everybody was engaging in made it seem like after the election was over, people were like mad at me because, because Hillary lost, because I was very anti-Hillary. But I mean, the thing is that, we all told people like Hillary's going to lose. I'm sorry. She's going to lose. And I was right. And people wanted to be mad at me for calling it how it ended up being, because I understood what the true, I guess, emotional state or political state of a lot of people's thinking was. Not only just people who were mad about Bernie, but, people who were true Trump supporters, people who really didn't like Hillary, and people who were pro-Bernie. You had all three factions of people, basically lining up against Hillary being president. This is becoming a long political speech, but and I'm sorry, but I'm still trying to make my point. The point I'm trying to make is that people were so absolutely resistant and unable to understand why people were so angry about Hillary, and totally resistant to understanding that that their ideas about the world and how how things should be run, like that they can't, they're not right. They couldn't be right. I mean, obviously, whatever your political beliefs are, I happen to be left leaning myself. I happen to be, progressive leaning myself. I happen to be a Bernie supporter. But, people were just so adamant that, that you could not, like, how dare these people think this way? How dare people, have different information than what, we all think, have different information than, have different feelings and thoughts than what is happening on the mainstream media. They're so reluctant to acknowledge that they, I think, were partially responsible for, setting up a situation in which, their ideas and their side lost. And in the, when they did lose, oh, what happened? How could this happen? How could this possibly be? Acting surprised. So when I'm going to tie this back into the Q stuff, and I'm going to tie this back into some other things that people, even if you want to say chemtrails or whatever the idea is, it's not important. The idea itself is not important. It's the information that's important. You may not agree with what is, what these people are saying or thinking. You may not agree with the idea of chemtrails or the idea of somebody talking about what's really going on in the, military intelligence versus deep state world or whatever it is. You may not believe that that's true. But the idea that you can't talk about it, or the idea that you can't believe it, or you shouldn't believe it, so therefore it shouldn't exist, or it should be, ignored or derided or rejected, sets you up for walking into a wall, like somewhere down the road, right? If a bunch of people, if a bunch of people think a certain idea is true, it doesn't really matter what the truth about it is. That thing might become an overwhelming majority in the minds of people. And so it doesn't matter what you think. If you're not aware of the reality that a lot of people feel this way, then how are you going to deal with it, right? So I'm trying to give you just a little bit of information about what's happening out there in the political world that is not being covered by the mainstream media. And the fact that people refuse to acknowledge it or refuse to look at it means that you're going to be confused when this becomes like real, you know, or when this becomes an overwhelming majority of people, you know, believing this or thinking this, or, you know, whether or not you believe this, you know, it's obvious. Look at Dane Wigington. Look how many followers and subscribers he has to his site. You know, you may think that this is misinformation, or you know, maybe he's a psyop. Maybe, I don't know, whatever it is that you think about it. But a whole lot of people believe this is true. And if you don't take it seriously, if you don't take that idea seriously, that a whole bunch of people believe this is true, and if your only reaction to it is, you know, stupid idiots, how dare they think this stuff, you're not going to change their minds by that attitude, and you're not going to usher them into possibly a new understanding of the world, and you're not going to usher them into, you know, possibly a realistic understanding of the world. And you might be ushering yourself into an unrealistic understanding of the world because you are resistant to information, because you have to shut down, you know, possibly even thinking about this thing. Oh, I can't, you know, I've already seen what somebody said about chemtrails. I saw what Paul Beckwith said. Yeah, so, you know, they're bunk. Really? You know, I like Paul Beckwith. I don't think that his explanation for why chemtrails were or were not true, I didn't think it was a very good explanation. Scientifically, I didn't think it was a very good explanation. I mean, it kind of made sense on some level, but on other levels, it didn't make sense to me. So I have questions, and it's okay for me to question that. And it's okay for you to question that. And, you know, it's okay for you to question my ideas about it. It's totally fine. That's what we should be doing. That's called thinking. That's called, you know, being open to other information. And please don't come on here and be like, if your mind's open, your brains will fall out. You know, like, no, that's not actually what happens. When your mind's open, you become smarter. That's what happens. So, you know, you have to be skeptical of all ideas, even these ideas in your own head. Which I am at all times. I'm highly skeptical of, that's my world, you know, that's my main thrust in life and living. My worldview is that, like, I think a whole bunch of things about all this stuff, and totally willing and possibly wrong on many of them, on some levels. But, you know, with enough information, with enough evidence, you can become fairly sure that some things are going to happen. Like climate change or climate destruction or climate collapse. It's kind of hard to, you know, I don't know. The person was trying to tell me that the polar ice caps are, you know, bigger than ever. That's why we're driving oil tankers through the Arctic, the ice-free Arctic, because the polar ice caps are bigger than ever. That's, you know, that's why we're losing glaciers at an unprecedented rate. Because the Arctic, you know, the Arctic ice is bigger than ever. It doesn't line up, dude. Okay, it just doesn't line up. And I will continue to try and bring this evidence to people who don't believe. Hopefully, you know, there are some people on here with open minds who are willing to discuss, who do not believe like the whole climate change theory. But I'm talking about climate destruction, and it's very, you know, how many things do you have to fake to make this, you know, make this fake news, you know, climate change thing real? Like, you got to do a lot of faking anyways. Somebody sent me a link to a Dar Jamail video. He has a video. He has a talk at California State University of Chico, titled "Update on the State of the Planet: How Then Shall We Live?" It's a good video. I'm going to link it below. I hope y'all can watch it if you haven't already watched it. Um, and you know, here's something that, you know, somebody also told me that sea level rise is a hoax. You know, but here's an article, Business Insider, from April 12th, 2018, Kevin Loria. Bullet points: Miami and Miami Beach already struggle with serious flooding related to sea level rise, even when there is no rain. If you want to see if this is true or not, just Google. There's some videos out there, you know, showing Miami flooding just in the last few years from tides, from high tides, not rain, not hurricanes, high tides. It's happening. It's not, nobody's making this up, you know. Nobody's setting up like camera crews and like, all right, throw a lot of water in the street and like make believe that there's a high tide. You actually can't. It's really difficult to fake something like that. If you can't see that with your own eyes, if you can't watch those videos and go like, oh, this is happening, like you are really, really trying hard to deny that something is happening. Like you're really going way out of your way to, you know, whatever. The ground under the cities of South Florida is largely porous limestone, which means water will eventually rise up through it. The cities are taking flood control measures like installing pumps, raising roads, and restoring wetlands. Coastal cities around the world face similar problems. Or just call the city of Miami. Hey, you know, what are you guys doing to mitigate, you know, pose as a concerned citizen. What are you guys doing to mitigate these high tides? They'll probably talk to you all day about it, or maybe not. When the flooding is really bad, water doesn't just fill the streets outside Manolo Pedreza's house. It bubbles up through a shower drain. Pedreza lives in Shorecrest, a northern Miami neighborhood that faces flooding so regularly it happens even when it hasn't rained. All it takes to fill the streets to knee-high depth on those days is a full moon. The flood comes up through storm drains, making it impossible to navigate without encountering the water, which is mixed with sewage and whatever else it picked up along the way. During a visit to Pedreza's neighborhood, I walk only where the water, likely filled with fecal bacteria, won't rise above my waterproof boots. I'm lucky that day. Pools cover parts of the streets, but at least I can walk the area without soaking my feet. This is nothing, Pedreza said in Spanish. Sometimes it comes all the way up to my house. The sunny day flooding, as it's known, is consistent enough that you can look at a calendar and a tide chart to plan a trip around it. High tides caused by interactions with the sun, moon, earth, and oceans are behind the flooding. I visited during what are often the highest tides of the year, known as king tides. Miami is kind of the poster child for a major city in big trouble, said Jeff Goodall, author of The Water Will Come, Rising Seas, Sinking Cities, and the Remaking of the Civilized World. Beyond the damage to homes, roads, or other infrastructure, the flooding also threatens drinking water and plant life. Ultimately, of course, it means large parts of the city would become permanently uninhabitable. That means the rest of the U.S. should be paying close attention to how Miami handles its struggles against sea level rise in the coming years. It could provide a window into the future for other large coastal urban areas. The Netherlands has been holding back the oceans for decades and is exporting its knowledge to cities such as New Orleans. But the Dutch have been building on land reclaimed from the sea. In Miami, it's a different situation. When low-lying neighborhoods in Miami and nearby Miami Beach were built up decades ago, they weren't developed with the assumption that seas would rise over time. In some places, buildings and roads are being raised or moved. In others, natural features like mangroves, reefs, and wetlands are being restored. Those are the kinds of changes that might be enough to keep much of Miami above water for at least a few decades. Planning longer term is trickier. Water is coming for Miami from all sides. You can break the major water challenges that the region is facing in three parts, or whammies. Jayantha Obasekera, a scientist with the South Florida Water Management District, said. The first is sea level rise. Because of ocean currents in Miami's location, sea levels are rising in and around city and Miami Beach faster than most of the world. The second problem facing South Florida is a vexing geological one. Our underlying geology is like Swiss cheese, said Obasekera. The solid ground in South Florida, Miami, Miami Beach, the Keys, and much of the rest of the peninsula is mostly limestone, made of compressed ancient reefs that are full of tiny holes. That means salty water is rising up through the ground itself. not just in the water surrounding Florida. The water could start intruding on drinking water reservoirs it already has in some areas and killing off non-salt tolerant vegetation, including shade-providing palms. It's impossible to wall South Florida's water out with levees or giant gates, as other cities have done. If the water rises up through the ground, when I asked one architect what the solution might be, she threw her hands up in the air. Obesekera said the third whammy, the effects of future storms, is still an unknown. The consequences of a warmer world on hurricane season are uncertain. But many scientists agree that we can expect storms to be more intense, which could mean higher storm surges and more rainfall. It's only possible to plan so far ahead, said Jane. There are pictures here of, floodwaters. It's only possible to plan so far ahead. Excuse me. Jumping around here. Said Jane Gilbert, the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Miami. Resilience officers in different cities face a variety of challenges, but for Gilbert, Miami, sea level rise and other challenges that come with it, like hurricane surges, housing affordability, and transportation through flooding neighborhoods, are top priorities. Predictions for sea level rise over the next 40 years show significant increases in sea level by 2060, likely between 13 and 34 inches. But beyond 40 years from now, the level of uncertainty is too high to know how much to rise to expect. When geologists look back at the history of Earth, they observe that sea level rise often comes in pulses associated with the melting of ice sheets, which bring dramatic amounts of water in very short time frame. If one of those pulses were to kick in, geologist Harold Wanless thinks it's possible Florida could see between 10 and 30 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Indeed. Okay. Starting to get late, and I have another article I want to hit, so I'm going to link this below, and you guys can read the rest of this. I just wanted to quickly say, obviously earlier I was talking about political resistance to other ideas. Obviously, clearly, if you're conservative, if you are of the belief that climate change isn't happening, and perhaps try a little less outrage about these elitist people, or these crazy climate change hoaxes, or these fake news. One man's fake news is another man's truth. So if you're on the conservative side of the spectrum, please, by all means, open your mind to what could be liberal news or mainstream news, or clearly you might be, and probably are, missing a lot of information. This is from First Post. For global water crisis, climate change may be the last straw. World to face 40% water deficit by 2030. Paris, before man-made climate change kicked in. This is from February 13th, 2018. Before man-made climate change kicked in, and well before day zero in Cape Town, where taps made run dry in early May, the global water crisis was upon us. Freshwater resources around the world were already badly stressed. Before heat trapping carbon emissions from fossil fuels began to warm Earth's surface and affect rainfall. Many major rivers, diverted, dammed, overexploited, no longer reach the sea. Aquifers, millennia in the making, millennia in the making are being sucked dry. Pollution in many forms is tainting water above ground and below. Cape Town, where the drought was declared a national disaster on Tuesday, was not especially beset by any of these problems. Indeed, in 2014, the half dozen reservoirs that served the South African cities, 4 million people brimmed with rainwater. But that was before a record-breaking 3-year, once every 3 centuries drought reduced them to a quarter capacity or less. Today, Cape Townians are restricted to 50 liters a day, 13.2 US gallons, less than runs down the drain when the average American takes a shower. Climate scientists foretold trouble, but it arrived ahead of schedule, said Helen Zill, Premier of the Western Cape Province. Climate change was to have hit us in 2025, she told a local news outlet. South African weather services have told me that their models don't work anymore. Worldwide, the water crisis hydra has been quietly growing for decades. Since 2015, the World Economic Forum's annual global risk report has consistently ranked water crisis as among the global threats with the greatest potential impact, above natural disasters, mass migration, and cyber attacks. Borrowed time across the densely populated Indo-Gangetic Plain, home to more than 600 million people, in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, groundwater is being pumped out at an unsustainable and terrifying rate, said Graham Hogley, Professor Emeritus at Trent University in Ontario, Canada. More than half the water in the same basin is undrinkable and unusable for irrigation due to elevated salt and arsenic levels, according to a recent study. Groundwater provides drinking water to at least half of humanity and accounts for more than 40% of water used for irrigation. But underground aquifers do not fill up swiftly, as a reservoir does after heavy rain. Their spongy rock can take centuries to fully recharge, which makes them a non-renewable resource on a human timescale. As a result, many of the world's regions have passed the threshold that Peter Glick, President Emeritus of the Pacific Institute and the author of The World's Water, has called peak water. Today, people live in places where we are effectively using all the available renewable water, or even worse, living on borrowed time by overpumping non-renewable groundwater, he told AFP. Exhausted groundwater supplies also cause land to subside and allow in coastal regions saltwater to seep into the water table. Dozens of megacities, rich and poor, are sinking. Jakarta, Mexico City, Tokyo, and dozens of cities in China, including Tianjin, Beijing, and Shanghai, have all dropped by a couple of meters over the last century. 500 million people in the world face severe scarcity all year round, said Arjen Hoekstra, a water management expert at Twente University in the Netherlands, or Twente, I guess it's pronounced. More than 1 in 3 live in India, with another 73 million in Pakistan, 27 million in Egypt, 20 million in Mexico, 20 million in Saudi Arabia, and 18 million in war-torn Yemen, he calculated in a recent study. Global warming comes on top of all of this, said Hoekstra. For each degree of global warming, about 7% of the world's population, 500 million people, will have 20% less fresh water, the UN's climate science panel has concluded. By 2030, the world will face a 40% water deficit if climate change continues unchecked. Glaciers in the Himalayas and Andes, upon which 500 million people depend, are rapidly retreating. At the same time, global water demand is projected to increase 55% by mid-century, mainly driven by the growth of cities in developing countries. All right, I'm going to link this below and let you all read the rest of this. There's not too much more of this, but I just want to finish up this video with another observation. So I went and saw a little pop culture reference. I went and saw Avengers last night. And interestingly enough, the villain, the super villain in the movie, Thanos, his whole scheme, his villainy was based around the fact that he was going to take out half the population of the universe in order to save itself from itself. Basically, one of the things he said in the movie was Titan was like any other planet, too many people and not enough resources. And I was like, whoa, I was watching this movie, I'm like, here they are describing like basically the problem of Earth, but painting, but I was kind of confused. I was like, what's the messaging here, right? Like they're describing the problem of Earth basically, and then they're saying this guy's solution is to take out half the population, and there you go, problem solved. Obviously, very evil, really shitty. Don't do that. That's not how you do it, right? So, but I was kind of like, this is kind of wild, you know, because they're like kind of presenting an actual real case, real life scenario in this, you know, fantastical, you know, galactic, you know, adventure or whatever. And kind of, and, you know, didn't really like, so, you know, the problem is actually real. The problem of overpopulation or too many people or too, you know, too few resources is very, very real. But, you know, what, I don't know, it just was like super glossed over, like what, you know. So this guy's solution, obviously bad. Don't do that. You know, but what, you know, his solution is actually like, you know, on some level, saving the universe from itself, right? Like they just never really like followed the line of the arc of the story. Like, I don't know, like the line of the logic behind, you know, the premise of the story was interesting because, you know, on some level, this guy is trying to do the right thing, but doing it in a really shitty way. But like, you know, what was the actual, you know, what's the actual answer? What's the, you know, this is a serious problem. Possibly life-ending for everyone problem. Probably extinction-inducing problem. And, you know, in real life, if you don't do something about it, which we won't, half the population is going to die anyways, like pretty soon. So, you know, it's just a weird, it's a conundrum, you know, it's a predicament. You know, none of that was talked about. None of that was investigated, of course, because, you know, it's a movie. But I would like to, I'll probably, if I get up the gumption, like put this out on like Facebook, see what people have to say about this. Probably not much, but, you know, again, here's another thing that, you know, is a thing that people cannot talk about, because you talk about overpopulation and suddenly people's like hackles go way up and they're just like, oh my God, how dare you talk about it? You know, like don't even, you know, like if you just say the word overpopulation, like people immediately like freak out, you know, on the left and the right, you know, they freak out. You can't talk about this. So, but this is true. This is actually happening. You can't talk about the truth because it's going to offend somebody. Even saying the word overpopulation offends people on some level, because, you know, are you talking about, who are you talking about? You're talking about third world countries? You're talking about first world countries? You're talking about America? You're talking about, like, even going into that conversation, like, makes people like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, but you can't deal with the problem unless you are able to actually, you know, take in ideas that might, you know, talk about ideas that might actually not be, you know, very, very nice or very comfortable. You know, they're going to be uncomfortable ideas. You can reject them, you know, but you can't, if you can't actually have an open conversation. You know, I read a Paul Ehrlich article a couple of weeks ago, and somebody came on, just jumped all over Paul Ehrlich and talked about him being like a, you know, extolling mass murder or, you know, like population control via, you know, killing people, and like just went way the heck out there. I'm like, that's not at all what he said. You didn't even listen to the article. Like, you just went, you know, you took some InfoWars stuff and just like smeared him, you know, like, and weren't even open to, weren't even open to like a debate on like, you know, this is the, you know, the problematic, outrageous and highly, you know, toxic way in which we present information now these days. It has to be bombastic. It has to be like, you know, super, oh my God, you know, super clickbaity and super, you know, just like get your emotions going. Like nothing can be discussed on a rational level, you know, especially not in the media. Anyways, it's been a long video, and I apologize for that. I just had a lot to ramble about, and I didn't mean to go on so long. I really have to go. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. Until next time, peace.